The stormy continent, the war-torn kingdom, the iron hooves are my footsteps, the arrowheads are my eyes, and the flag of the falcon on the battlefield flutters in the wind. From the remote southern region to the bustling Kyoto, with a unique perspective, the magnificent war reproduces the rise of an empire, a novel on horseback riding and slashing, keywords of the novel. Quanguo no pop-up, Quanguo TXT complete collection download, Quanguo latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Folded Winged Falcon. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Chapter 1 Folded Winged Falcon. The dimly lit castle hall, with the crackling sound of rosin oil burning on the walls, features a middle-aged nobleman dressed in gorgeous aristocratic attire, displeased as he reads parchment documents in his hand. His sharp voice echoes through the hall, easily evoking associations with a certain special group of people. Descendants of the great holy king, guardians of all the people of the world, unparalleled co-ruler of the United Kingdom of Wikia, His Majesty the Honorable Guitar III, appointed Dasta as the Marquis of the Falcon in accordance with the inheritance law of the kingdom's lords, to assist the royal family in managing the affairs of the Ribok region. Who is this dead monster? Diyu wanted to stand up, but found that his body could not move. He could only pout his buttocks with embarrassment and lay on the ground with both hands. His mind was blank, except for a heavy oil tanker truck that ran over him. After feeling a sharp pain, he drifted into the air, helplessly watching his body burn into gray powder in the flames of the tanker truck, with his mouth wide open and shouting but no sound, his body drifted helplessly in the wind. The eerie and terrifying scene woke Diyu up from his dreams, until a dazzling white halo covered his head and he was inexplicably transported to this unfamiliar world, time-traveled. Diyu never believed in the cycle of human death, but now he had to believe it. It was just that this pattern seemed to have mutated in him, and his wandering soul descended directly onto a rural marquis named Dustin with the white light. To die in one world, to be reborn in another world, this should be a time travel, right? The strange sense of schizophrenia made Diyu feel shivery. Will all the souls of the deceased be transported to another world? This reminds Diyu of the story he once read about Zhuangzhou dreaming of butterflies. Did he dream of a butterfly, or did a butterfly dream of himself? Perhaps the 20 or so years of his past life were just a dream called Little Lord Dustin. Perhaps 2,000 years ago, Zhuangzhou also encountered the same thing as himself. The death of life may just be the beginning of a new world, and no one knows what the world will be like after death. According to many great novelists, when enough karma and intention reach a certain level, illusory things will also become reality. It is possible that in the cycle of the 6 realms of hell, an additional crossing path may be added. Is it true that I am a life of time travel? Diyu shook his head unwillingly, but heard the old butler beside him urging him, "Young master, take the appointment letter quickly. This is very impolite." The old butler's whispers stunned Diyu, who was lost in thought. He stumbled to his feet and stood up, taking the appointment letter from the pale-faced king's envoy. The old butler beside him quickly handed a bulging small bag to the envoy of the kingdom and apologized, "Lord Catherine, I'm really sorry. You know my young master's condition, please don't mind his rude behavior." How could this be? Duke Du Ikri of Kyoto had already told me. The king's envoy weighed the weight of the money bag slightly, heard a metallic sound coming from inside, and his face turned slightly red like ice. Finally, the envoy looked at Diyu holding the appointment letter and shook his head with regret. Unfortunately, the famous Kingdom Falcon family has also declined now. The old butler respectfully bid farewell to the king's envoy, and upon his return, his figure appeared even more hunched and lonely. Looking at Diyu, who had been with the head of the family for 2 generations, the old butler shook his head helplessly and sighed, "I really don't know what the old master thinks about handing over the family to an idiot." At night, Diyu lay in bed, his eyes bulging open, and chaotic thoughts filled his mind. The boundless confusion made it difficult for him to fall asleep. Diyu's mind was filled with memories of this small lord named Dasta, a continental plate called Caridia, with more than 10 kingdoms of different sizes scattered on it. The small lord he possessed was called Dasta, since childhood, he has been a dull and naive person. There is a powerful grandfather who serves as the Minister of Military Affairs in the royal capital. It seems that the family also has a resounding name, Kingdom Falcon. According to convention, this idiot named Dustin should be sent to Kyoto for an idle position after reaching adulthood. The inheritance rights of the family will fall on his cousin in 2 months, a 10-year-old child who has been known for his wisdom since childhood, but a sudden situation changed everything. Half a month ago, the old marquis who went hunting in the snow-capped mountains encountered an avalanche, leaving only a few members of a 100-strong guard. When the old marquis dug himself out of the snowdrift, he was frozen into an ice stick and his body was so hard that it couldn't even be hammered. In the end, he had to be cremated locally, without even leaving his family's will. This unexpected event disrupted the original arrangement. Although Dustin was an idiot and the only heir of the old marquis, according to the kingdom's eldest son inheritance system, he was clearly a mentally disabled Dustin and successfully succeeded to the title of Falcon Marquis. This caused dissatisfaction among several other branches of the family, who announced their departure from the family's orthodoxy a few days ago and officially became the new nobles. Amidst the betrayal and estrangement of many, Kyoto in the east and Rigays in the west successively announced their departure from the Falcon family, while the small lords of Sidari in the south and Stern in the west held a wait-and-see attitude. This has caused the relatively large Falcon family's territory to split apart, leaving only the relatively fertile Jatari region, which is still under the orthodox control of the Dusta family. What should I do myself? Confused, Diyu remained silent in secret. After more than 10 days of learning from the butler, he found himself in a precarious situation. If it weren't for Dusta's mother's family's strong influence in Kyoto, it was estimated that even this territory would have been taken away. It is said that several branches of the family had also gone to Kyoto to seek help, but under the interference of the powerful Kyoto grandfather family, they finally hugged this place of residence. But for the division of the Falcon family itself, as an outsider, Grandpa had no choice but to say, "The falcon's wings have broken, let it survive on land." Amidst numerous doubts and confusions, Diyu could no longer bear his heavy eyelids and fell asleep in a confused state of mind. In the early morning, the silent Falcon castle was shattered by a series of noisy noises. "Dusta, you little scammer! Get out of here!" Diyu, who was still asleep early in the morning, was awakened by the noisy fighting outside the bedroom. Listening to the familiar sharp and high-pitched female voices outside, a middle-aged lady's image couldn't help but come to his mind. "Bold thing, I know he's right inside. Go and catch him for me." Mrs. Duckley Moore, the sister of former Lord Daikon and the aunt of Dusta, this arrogant woman always thought her son was enough to ascend to the throne of the Falcon family leader, but her previous efforts were ruined by that damn eldest son inheritance law. What's the noise? It's disturbing to be quiet in the early morning. Diyu, who is used to sleeping late, got up in a daze and angrily pulled open the bedroom door. The scene before him made Diyu take a breath of air. His old butler knocked him to the ground, with blood stains on his forehead. The hall was in a mess, and dozens of servants and guards from the family were chased and beaten by more than 10 burly men wearing lightweight scales, swaying and howling everywhere. According to the conventional family headquarters, there are always 50 guardian knights, but due to lack of confidence in the mentally challenged Master Dustin, these hundreds of knights who originally came to fight for the glory flag of the Falcon family have no hope for the upcoming new master, and there will be no future under an idiot lord. The downfall of the Falcon family has been predetermined, and these knights who came to pursue glory and wealth will no longer stay in this hopeless place, choosing to leave the Falcon family one after another. As a result, there is no orthodox knight in the family headquarters except for servants and attendants. This time, they are suddenly attacked by more than a dozen knights, making it almost impossible to organize any decent resistance. The knight at the forefront was the #1 hitter under Lady Dokali Moore's command. He was a powerful silver cross knight, standing 2 meters tall and standing 1 head higher than the tall Vikings. Yasutai kicked over a guard servant and suddenly found himself in front of him, with an unobstructed passage appearing in front of him. Yasutai could even see clearly the panic in the eyes of that foolish lord this time, Mrs. Du Kylie Moore has invested a lot of money. As long as anyone can catch her, this foolish and chubby lord will reward the most fertile town in the territory to anyone. I caught him. Thinking that the rich town of Aikali was within reach of him, Yasutai let out a strange cry and rushed towards Duyu. His large hands, with thick knuckles, excitedly clenched and made a click sound. Young master, hurry up. The old butler, who had been stepped on by a knight, shouted with a face full of sorrow and anger. However, the tall and burly Jothei was like a lion charging into a flock of sheep, easily breaking through the obstruction of the two family guards and charging towards Dustin with a fierce expression. Although Dusta, who was leaning over by Duyu, was also relatively overweight, he was clearly not in the same class as Yasutai, who was about to rush towards him. When he saw Yasutai pouncing fiercely, the incompetent chubby young master, like a fat hen under the gaze of everyone in the hall, screamed in panic and hid in the bedroom. He frantically tried to close the door inside, but was kicked open by the tall and powerful Yasutai. That's it, Master Dusta fell into their hands. All the servants of the Falcon family felt a sense of desolation in their hearts. Master will definitely be under house arrest, and the leader of the Falcon family will be replaced again. The once strong family had fallen so quickly, and the Falcon's wings have really broken. Unexpectedly, it has fallen to the point of being bullied by hens. But things were even worse than expected. Everyone heard the collision of tables and chairs coming from Master Dusta's room. Not only was there Master Dusta's unique high and short screams, but there was also a crisp sound of pa, pa mixed in. This unique sound made everyone outside the door stand there. Everyone can't believe their ears. What sound is that? The temptation of the devil. If there were a couple inside now, it would be understandable, but there was only that chubby idiot and the burly Jothai inside. Are they? Imagine the burly Jothai squirming on top of a chubby white man, and everyone felt nauseous. No wonder Jothai was so brave, no wonder he rushed up with such abnormal excitement. It turns out he has this hobby. I'm fighting with you. The unbearable Falcon guard, disregarding the rule of drawing a sword or dying in the kingdom, angrily drew out his knight's sword. His red face had a pair of burning red eyes, and he wanted to burn all the enemies to ashes. Sending such a pervert to catch his young master is too insulting. According to the kingdom's regulations, drawing a sword on a knight represents a decisive challenge to the knight. The challenged knight can kill the challenger without taking responsibility. I'll beat you to death, you're so awesome. As the scolding echoed from Dusta's room, to everyone's surprise, the burly Jothei stumbled backwards. In front of him, everyone believed that the foolish young master who had been beaten was using his thick palm to fiercely slap Jothei's face like a storm. I made you not learn well from a young age. I told you to enter someone else's room without knocking. I didn't expect this chubby guy's body to be so excellent. It's the best material for practicing Neijia fist, said everyone in the hall, completely opposite everything. Just as Duyu saw Yasutai charging towards him, Duyu, who had been a master of internal martial arts in his previous life, naturally reacted. However, he found that the speed of his body's blood flow could reach several times that of his previous life, which made Duyu overjoyed. Neijia boxing emphasizes improving the speed and accumulation of blood and gas in the body through exercise. On weekdays, the spiritual and blood energy is deeply stored in the abdomen of the dantian. When needed, just move your mind and the blood energy will immediately circulate throughout your body, mobilize the whole body's energy to attack a bit, invincible, so internal martial arts often do not leave any marks on the surface of the body. However, once hit, it can penetrate deep into the body and damage the chi, blood, and internal organs, making it difficult to heal over time. A spiritual movement. Surprisingly, a spiritual movement. Duyu's hands swung faster and heavier, and the blood splattered from Yasutai's face onto the wall, leaving startling crimson marks. Duyu realized that he was just a momentary change in his mind, and his entire body's blood was rapidly flowing into his palms and eyes. The swelling and pain and the sound of ear bone fluctuations could be faintly heard in his palms, and with the fluctuation of his heart, this strange feeling was felt. Let Du thoroughly confirm his guess. The saying that the heart of a child is moved by a spiritual heart is true. In Duyu's eyes, the painful and evasive movements of Jothatai were as slow as a turtle, just like the slow movements slowed down 100 times in a movie. The whole world suddenly became silent, and the airflow flowed slowly around him like a swirling water flow. Using one's limited blood and energy to unleash infinite external forces is precisely the sacred realm of spiritual heart movement, in Neja Fist. But soon Du discovered a problem, and this state was very short. Du found that his body movements were also extremely slow, and the sequelae of forced movement began to appear. The lack of coordination in his physical movements made Du feel his head swell, giving him an indescribable mild dizziness. This feeling made Du feel cold in his heart, which was similar to the legendary infatuation with fire. Later, he felt relieved because the owner of this body had never received any training in internal martial arts, so he naturally couldn't keep up with his own level in boxing speed. If it were still my original body, I would definitely use the heart-breaking footwork to kill this clueless thing. Du couldn't help but feel as he looked at the large figure slowly moving in the distance. Although his movements were also slow, he was able to achieve foresight, which was enough for Du, a skilled insider, to use. With a chubby palm, Du swiftly and fiercely struck Jothai's protruding right face. The tremendous force immediately made Jothai dizzy and his two front teeth soar into the sky. Yasatai hasn't tasted it yet. Pa slapped again, and Jothai felt that his proud high-nose bridge had been broken by the palm of the terrifying fat man's hand. His entire nose was bleeding profusely, and the nosebleed uncontrollably spread everywhere. In an instant, Jothai, who had been slapped in the face by a chubby storm, felt like he was being attacked by a raging bear that had just been disturbed by a hunter and awakened from hibernation in anger. The most despicable thing is that this foolish chubby guy is still howling all kinds of screams in his mouth, and those who don't know think it's this dead chubby guy who's been poisoned right now. Pop, pop, the loud slapping sound plunged the entire hall into silence, leaving everyone stunned as they watched. A terrifying sensation shook everyone's hearts, and every crisp slap seemed to hit their own faces. Before this, no one had imagined that slapping the face, the most common form of physical punishment, would have such power. The never-ending sound of slapping could even touch the deepest fear in one's heart, even when one closes their eyes. The power used by Du was not great. Yasatai dodged around, but he was always within the range of the fat man's archery. Yasatai never dreamed that one day he would be beaten like a sandbag, which was a blatant insult. Oh my goodness, hurry up and catch him. Madame Ducally-Moore saw her number one knight being beaten by her foolish nephew with no fighting power, and first came to her senses from shock. She yelled at the dozen or so knights who were chasing after her servants, but on the way, she was tightly hugged by the fallen family guard and had to stop. Protect the young master. Fight with them. Seeing his young master so heroic, the dozen or so attendants and servants who had already scattered found weapons from somewhere and rushed into the hall with various agricultural tools and wooden sticks. The riders who were held by the servants' thighs and unable to move were knocked down like sandbags. Quickly, let me leave safely. These people are all crazy. Mrs. Ducally-Moore, who was frightened by the sight in front of her, turned pale and stepped back in terror. Du heard Mrs. Ducally-Moore's screams and immediately increased his strength in his hand. After a move of bare paw, Jothatai, who was already ashamed and almost unconscious, completely collapsed. Seeing that the most brave Jothatai had also been knocked unconscious by the perverted lord, the remaining knights ran towards the door one after another. It's over, everything's over. Hysterical Lady Docaramore collapsed on the ground, looking at the chandelier in despair. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Second-class families. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Second-class families. Du was shirtless with his upper body accompanied by every breath. A familiar heat rose from the chest, guided by the heart, circulating within this unfamiliar body for 10 weeks, thin, pale black beads of sweat rolled down from the forehead. Although it was in the cool late autumn, one could still see Du Yu's body shrouded in mist, as if standing in a steaming hot bathroom. Breaking. With Du Yu's hands inserted into his waist, he let out a deep, angry shout. The energy stored in the body has reached its peak and has reached a point where it is neither spitting nor displeased. The sound of Chang, with a hint of inner strength, is like a crisp strike of gold and stone, echoing around the mountaintop and lingering between the mountains. Ah! The old butler next to him, who was almost drowsy, was startled by this sound. Since the foolish young master wielded great power and grabbed Mrs. Du Kylie Moore, who came to provoke him, every morning the young master would run to the nearest high mountain near this castle to practice this strange exhalation, from the initial sound of exhaling like a hoarse cough, to the current sound like a metallic thud. Although the old butler cannot understand, he also knows how big the difference is here. Being introverted, spreading outwards, with a childlike heart and a lively body. Du Yu stretched his hands and feet in satisfaction, dancing his windy arms that almost made the old butler beside him dizzy and fall. Du Yu is very satisfied with Dusta's body, but it has only been a little over a month. This body is already able to keep up with its own desires, although there is still a long way to go before the requirement of spiritual heart movement. It has improved significantly compared to before. Seeing that the young master's strange habit of arranging rows every day had been completed, the old butler wiped his saliva from the corner of his mouth and quickly walked up to report, "Young master, the people of Mrs. Du Kelly Moore's family have come again and they are requesting to redeem his wife. What do you think should be done?" The old butler looked up and carefully measured the young master's face. Even if it's silly, the old butler knows that the chubby man in front of him is definitely not the foolish young master who was deceived before. Everyone thinks that the young master is still the same idiot as before, but the old butler who has been following Du Yu for over a month knows that he is just acting. The young master doesn't know what hobby he has developed, and he has a special fondness for his foolish identity. This time, even the lion spoke up and demanded that the Dukali Moore family exchange the most fertile town in their territory for the captured Dukali Moore lady. That's the second largest town in the entire Falcon territory, and it's the home of the entire Dukiri Moore family. Of course, it is widely claimed that this was a suggestion put forward by the old butler, which made the loyal old butler feel very frustrated. Fortunately, he did not encounter any traveling knights who uphold justice. Why don't you treat yourself as a challenging subject during your travels? An evil butler who disrupts your master. I may become the target that knights use to show courage to noblewomen at a certain banquet. The late season is not guaranteed. The old butler shook his head in pain. The young master had changed too much, and compared to before, it was like a different person. The old butler felt a headache when he thought about this. They haven't given up yet. The young master's slightly silly voice interrupted the old butler's thoughts. Give me Erica Town, and I'll let Mrs. Dokali Moore go. Du Yu extended a chubby finger and shook it in front of the old butler, taking the clothes from his hand. Then he said, "This condition is very fair. If you want money, it's up to people. Let them choose for themselves. I'm afraid this is very..." The old butler's face turned pale, and Du Yu waved his hand to interrupt. "Tell them not to bargain with an idiot. That's even more foolish than an idiot's behavior. Being a foolish lord is actually a good thing." Du Yu secretly felt proud in his heart, feeling that being labeled as an idiot is a good thing in this world. For example, it can help him avoid the tedious etiquette that many nobles should follow. A fool, in exchange for a peace of mind. Young master, your clothes haven't been fastened yet. The old butler kept following behind from the mountain, making Du Yu feel annoyed, but there was nothing he could do. Who is called the old butler? He is the only person in this world who truly cares about himself. Through a month of interaction, Du Yu has gained a new understanding of this world. In the past world, shopping without a shirt was not a big deal, especially in the hot summer. Young and old males can openly showcase their bodies in the dumpling soup-like swimming pool, but in this world that values bloodline and dignity, a nobleman strolls the streets without wearing clothes. He will definitely have the king order his head to be beheaded. This is an insult to the dignity of the entire aristocracy, a betrayal of the order of the royal family. Such people, if they are not crazy, may be rebellious. Rebellion must not be tolerated. This is a lesson from previous experiences. King Lawrence IV of the most powerful country in mainland China was such a carefree prince when he was young, running horses and walking dogs, being unrestrained and typical of a spendthrift. No one expected that during the Rearden Civil War 30 years ago, he kicked his own uncle and took the throne as the first king of the continent. This doesn't have much connection, but nobles always like to see things from the details. The paranoid and stubborn Wickian royal family naturally attributes all of this to Lawrence's rebellious and reckless youth. After completing the morning exercise, you prepared to go down the mountain. This mountain is right behind Falcon Castle, standing on a small path in the mountains. The scenery near Falcon Castle is panoramic, and the villages surrounded by morning mist are distributed on the west side of the castle. The grey dirt road winds in, and the yellow thatched roof is crowded layer by layer, shining golden light in the morning light. A pointed tower protrudes from the top, which is the town center hall. Through the introduction of the old butler, you knew that it was already the largest town in his territory, Taki Town, with a population of 1,200 people. A winding white river flowed across the town, like a silver belt surrounding his castle. This is my territory. This is where I will live in the future. You felt like a rural tycoon, counting his wealth. He was feeling depressed. Even in such a big place, he could be called a marquis. Get out of the way. I have an urgent military mission to find the leader of the Falcon family. You suddenly heard a debate coming from the mountain pass. At the intersection below, a middle-aged knight was arguing with the attendants of the mountain pass guards. I am the messenger of the military affairs department. If something important is delayed, the military affairs department will cut off your heads. The knight's loud voice even reached halfway up the mountain. Without orders, even His Majesty the King cannot enter. The guards looked at him coldly, with two rudimentary and rusty spears lying horizontally in front of him. The knight's face turned red from frustration, but he didn't dare to force himself in front of a dozen or so attendants. Since the last time someone suddenly knocked on him, in order to prevent such embarrassing things from happening again, the old butler specially selected more than 10 of the most loyal guards from the family's attendants to follow you at any time. I am the leader of the Falcon family. What can I do for you? You waved his hand and asked the guard to make way, letting the knight come over. Seeing the blocking guards dodge towards both sides, revealing a chubby white man dressed in ordinary clothes, the middle-aged knight looked at him with a proud expression on his face, the crude rural aristocrat. The knight curled his lips and took out a sealed parchment roll from his backpack on his horse, handing it to you. This is a requisition letter personally signed by His Majesty the King. The kingdom will conquer the mountain barbarians in the eastern mountainous areas in 2 months, and lords from all over must gather at least 200 soldiers to rush to the Tyr region in the east by the end of October to participate in His Majesty's expedition. The knight's formulaic language carries a hint of obvious disdain. This is the Military Affairs Department's plan for this battle. Please take a look. The middle-aged knight took out a letter from his own pocket, sealed with honey wax, and handed it to you. If you have no objection, this will be the plan for this battle. The middle-aged knight impatiently left the plan, flipped over and mounted his horse without even a basic salute, and rode away. War. You was dumbfounded as he held the command book in his hand, his mind still lingering. Even a small lord like himself wanted to go to war. It's so despicable. The chubby man muttered angrily, suddenly shouting, "Damn the king, let him go to hell." "Young master, you can't say this." The old butler next to him almost scared off this heinous remark. He looked around cautiously and saw a dozen or so attendants standing far away before finally letting out a sigh of relief. "I thought I wouldn't receive a conscription order this year," the old butler sighed dejectedly. "I didn't expect to still avoid it. These old masters from Kyoto are really restless. It's finally a bountiful year today, and we're going to war again. I really don't know what the poor barbarians who only have pants left are worth thinking about. After fighting for so many years, I haven't seen anyone snatch back a piece of land, except for the orphans and widows who left behind a piece of land. I haven't even caught a wild boar's hair." The old butler complained with a mournful expression on his face. "Are the barbarians very poor?" Do you asked curiously, holding a command book in his hand. Of course, the old butler affirmed with a face full of affirmation. Those barbarian men are shirtless and don't even have a decent animal skin, but it is said that barbarian women are very good. Especially the Hulan tribe in the southern sea. The old butler's mouth was full of saliva. This old man, who had spent his whole life in Falcon territory, could only rely on his own imagination and legendary lust for the barbarians in the east. Old pervert. Do you look down upon the old butler and secretly looked down upon him? This is the military order. The fat man carefully opened the document. The rough wool roll was embroidered with a round of red thread on the edge, which looked out of place. The sheepskin was quite soft and smooth, making you couldn't help but think of a genuine sheepskin shoulder bag from before. The old housekeeper looked at the military order and said helplessly, every year after the harvest of grain in autumn, His Majesty the King will gather lords from all over the country to participate in the foreign competition, which has been the tradition of the kingdom. I originally thought that due to the young master's illness, the Falcon family would no longer be recruited this year, but I didn't expect to receive a recruitment order from His Majesty the King. Now there is no knight in the entire family. What should I do, knight? Soldier. Du was taken aback by the old butler's words, and after a detailed and patient explanation, he finally understood. Originally, in this world, soldiers were sent by knights from various nobles to villages and distributed according to their heads, usually in a ratio of 20-1, for a village of 200 people, 10 young adults must be drawn to participate in the Lord's battle, and there's no money to take it yet. It's the kind of cheap soldier who holds a hoe and is a farmer, gives a spear and is a soldier, and dies in battle without any compensation. To put it simply, it means working for the Lord in vain. The place where they settled was owned by the king and various lords, while the farmers themselves died. No wonder His Majesty the King is so passionate about war. Anyway, since food has been harvested in various regions, it's also idle. Why not fight when there is food and soldiers? Robbing money, food, and women can also be considered as a form of entertainment in aristocratic life. What is this? The proposal finally unfolded under Du's curious gaze. Looking at the rough red jars above, Du really had a feeling of wanting to vomit blood. Damn it, what kind of thing are these? Du saw on a rudimentary parchment paper, roughly drawing a dozen or so slashes with red paint. Just like before performances in later generations, a group of positioning lines were divided. There were sparse annotations on it, and Du carefully looked at them, realizing that they were all the positions of the lords and soldiers from various regions standing in line and the direction of their attacks. The entire plan is just a pre-war deployment map, which is not the most frustrating for Du, young master. Look, the old butler said with an unpleasant expression. Rough fingers suddenly pointed to a corner on the map, where a blue dye was used to depict something that looked like an eagle. Seeing the fat man speechless, the painters in this military department are really not average good. Look at that expression, that flapping motion, it's like a chubby hen. This is the kingdom falcon. Hey! In previous years, we used to be arranged in the front row, said the old butler with a sense of loneliness and helplessness in his voice. Our position has been arranged in the last row this year. It seems that we have fallen to the level of a third-class family, the old butler explained quickly as he saw Du's puzzled expression on his face. The young master may not have known that in the army front arrangement of the kingdom, the higher the line, the closer it is to His Majesty's main team, the more it represents nobility and status. In the past, the knightly squadron of the Falcon family was always arranged in the upper right position of the king's main team, like a warhawk standing on His Majesty's right arm, ready to hunt down prey at any time. Just wait for His Majesty the King's command, follow behind the king's main team, and tear the enemy apart with the sword in your hand. This is also the origin of the name, Falcon family, in the kingdom. But now, the old butler shook his head with a mournful expression on his face. Now arranged by the Ministry of Military Affairs in the bottom right corner of the last row. Even if Du is foolish, it can be clearly seen that this is completely different from the prestigious family before, because whether viewed from top to bottom or from left to right, it is the lowest position in the military ranks. Good in the end, it's the safest in the end. After listening to the old butler's explanation, Dio not only didn't complain, but also breathed a sigh of relief. He really wanted to arrange himself in the first row. There are no knights, and a group of farmers form the Falcon family without letting the enemy on the opposite side annihilate them in one go. This is a real battle, not just a brawl or a house fight. No matter how high my martial arts are, I am afraid that the kitchen knife may not be good. In case I encounter a fierce character inside, my newly started life as a small lord will not be lost. Even if I'm lucky enough not to meet those heavy knights who kill for pleasure, the scattered arrowheads in the sky are enough for oneself to endure. Dio's mind showed a tragic image of himself falling with arrows all over his body. Tragic. What a tragedy. What a tragedy. Dio shook his head. I don't even want to change ownership of a title that I haven't even covered my butt yet. Let's just be a small landlord. At least it's better than some comrades who have become extremely poor farmers. Others can make a name for themselves with their literary and military skills, while I am just lazy. I am not a match for those crazy people in this world. Enfin, keep a low profile. Dio secretly cheered himself up. Calm down, you must be calm. At least you have your own 1 acre and 3 cents of land, and you can still tease the cook when you have free time, taking advantage of the opportunity to scare the little village girl. Maybe there will be magical days like ***. What do you need to live for if you are beaten to death, and to live happily is what you need most. 1 death is enough. Can't we avoid this? For example, I'm crazy or foolish. Dio looked at the old butler with a hopeful expression on his face. Talking nonsense. Anyway, my reputation outside is not good either. If I can pretend to be foolish and go crazy to avoid it, why go and die? Young master. This is useless. The old butler shook his head helplessly. It is the Lord's duty to assist the king in battle. If the young master does not go, other branches will rush. At that time, His Majesty will definitely think that the Falcon family does not respect the royal family, and the young master's title will be in danger. Damn it. Isn't this just a knife for stretching your head and a knife for shrinking your head? Dio angrily cursed. Since we can't avoid it, we have to face it. Dio is also a determined person who took the family seal off his finger and handed it over to the old butler. Release the conscription order. I need a 200-strong army. As a lord, it is important to carry your own seal with you. For convenience, many families seal their seals on rings. Dio feels quite good about this setting. It's like carrying an ATM with you, but unfortunately, the Falcon family bank doesn't have any money. Young master, this is probably very difficult. The old butler looked at him awkwardly and hesitated in his voice. Last year, our family lost more than 300 soldiers in the Battle of Saco Canyon. We were originally planning to compensate for some of the deceased, but it was delayed due to internal strife within the family. Now, it is very difficult to draw manpower from those villages with strong resistance. Even if we bring all the family guards with us, it may be difficult to gather them all. He didn't say much. Be poor. I'm so poor that I fainted to death. Even if I were to die, I wouldn't be able to gather enough people. The only thing Dio could tell from the old butler's almost messy face was this: damn it. Then I'm not in a fiscal deficit. Dio frowned and a crooked idea came to his mind. He looked at the butler's bitter gourd face and asked, as a lord, I should have the power to issue decrees. Of course. The young master is a lord. As long as he is in his own territory, it is an easy task. The old butler nodded. That's good. Dio waved his hand and said, immediately issue a new law. If you kill an enemy in battle, the Lord will reward you with a silver coin. If you kill a knight, the Lord will give you a gold coin. If you kill a lord, I will give him a piece of land. Write this into a notice and distribute it immediately. This. The old butler is foolish and has no idea what the foolish young master really wants to do. Just go ahead and do it. Dio impatiently turned around and left, secretly calculating in his heart that the saying, under heavy rewards, there must be a brave man. In the past world, the best way to mobilize the enthusiasm of his subordinates was through money. You didn't believe that in front of the shiny gold coins, no one would be willing to come. End of this chapter. 3. Chapter 3 Genius. Idiot. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Genius. Idiot. You looked at the account book in his hand with a dignified face. It recorded the grain that had just been harvested in his territory this month. Generally speaking, it was very good, but the balance was seriously unbalanced. This year's rain was abundant, and the rare daifengshu, salad of assorted fresh vegetables, of grain was 30% more than that of previous years. However, this did not make you happy. Is grain useful? Do you still remembers watching the scene of new grain entering the warehouse a few days ago? The family's tax collector opened the door of the warehouse, and a strong smell of moldy grains rushed in, making you furrow slightly. In front of him were piles of grain bags made of hemp grass tied together, piled up like a small mountain. It was obvious that 3 different colors divided the grain piles into 3 parts. The granary guard pointed to the grain pile and said, "The top is last year's chingu, and the middle is from the past 2 or 3 years. It's hard to say what's at the bottom." The granary guard looked embarrassed and said, "Because we always take grain from the top, no one knows how long the grain at the bottom has been piled up. The grain in the castle granary is enough for the people in the castle to eat for 3 years now." You looked at the bags of new grains stacked on top again and felt helpless. The Falcon territory was a traditional grain-producing area, which led to too much reliance on agriculture and almost no commercial economy in the territory. The typical rural economic model was because the territory was divided into several pieces, and the taxes in several small towns were very low, only just over 3,000 gold coins. If it weren't for the knights under his command who had already run out of money, the money was not enough to provide annuities for the knights. The account books showed that every year, half of the food stored in the castle was transported out to fill this big hole. Thinking about the knights who were raised by these families with a lot of money, but fled without a trace during the most dangerous times of the family, you couldn't help but develop a dislike for the profession of knights, which appears sacred on the outside but is dirty inside. Seeing the young master's tight eyebrows, tax collector Stannard reported with suspicion in his heart, "I heard that there are bounties in various villages, and we have gathered 200 young and middle-aged people, including many hunters from the mountains. The Duke Moore family has agreed to exchange with the bustling town of Ikari, which will increase our income by 1,000 gold coins." Otherwise, the tax collector did not continue, but that was just a crying face. Mountain hunter. You, who was flipping through the ledger, stopped his work. In fact, you couldn't understand what was written on the ledger at all. The complex numbers and hundreds of merchants, as well as the names of tenants, made you feel dizzy. He pretended to look through the ledger just to show it to the tax collector, asking them to do less. Tax collector Stannard saw the Lord shift his attention away from the ledger and breathed a sigh of relief. Yes, 30.8 mountain hunters were willing to participate in the expedition. These barbarians who liked to run around in the mountains used to run far away when they heard about the expedition. This time, they ran back because they saw the Lord's notice. It is impossible to completely ensure that there are no problems with the accounts. As a hereditary tax collector, Stannard admits to being much more honest than many of his peers. He has only concealed some smaller transactions. Although the money is not much, it is already enough for his expenses. He is already old, and how to safely hand over this position to his son is his most concerned issue. The tax collector is a legacy of wealth. You closed the ledger on the table, and after deducting daily expenses, there were still over 1,000 gold coins left, which was enough to calculate the bounty for this expedition. This relieved you, who had been worried about not having enough gold coins. You raised his head and moved his slightly sore neck. After reading the account book, you had a certain understanding of the source of income for a lord. He decided that the Lord's gold coins would come from his own territory's level road tax and townhead tax, while the rest, such as the income from robbing enemy lords, redeeming hostages, and receiving rewards from the king, were uncertain numbers. The economic region of the kingdom is located in the central part near Kyoto and in the northern territories where border trade is prevalent. It is said that the lords there not only have their own caravans, but also establish a huge smuggling network. They are the most loyal to launching wars. The various special products and women of the barbarians are the source of their wealth. In remote southern regions like the Falcon family, in order to have money, besides fixed taxes, they can only plunder enemies and seize land. What kind of ledger is this? It's just crying poverty. Do you angrily place the ledger heavily on the table, causing the tax collector to shiver in fear? Do you looked at the sorrowful tax collector and asked, you just proposed to have your son take over your position. You can bring him here. I need to see my future tax collector. Quickly, the fat tax collector Stannard led a handsome young man into the hall. I never expected the fat tax collector to have such a handsome son, but unfortunately, the young man's right foot was clearly limping and he walked with bumps, which looked really pitiful. The chubby man looked curiously at his new tax collector and asked, are you Statuenko, the son of the tax collector? According to your father, you worked as a servant knight at the Marquis of Skarna for a year. How could you suddenly think of coming back to become a tax collector? Being a knight is more promising than being a tax collector. The young man's eyes rolled around with a bone-like expression, and when he saw Diouf sitting in the lord's seat in the hall, his heart couldn't help but feel a sudden surge. He felt that Diouf's sharp eyes seemed to be able to see him through, making him feel a sense of melancholy. Is this the idiotic lord circulating outside? How could someone with such eyes be an idiot? The young man's expression was unnatural and he said, Sir, I used to be the captain of the archer squadron under the Marquis of Skarna, but I was shot in the right leg by the Kujit people in last year's battle and had to come back. Thinking of his bloody battle, but not being appreciated by the lord, Statuenko's originally spirited face dimmed, and his fingers on both sides were tightly squeezed together. Diouf looked at the sadness and anger on the young man's face and waved his hand to the tax collector father and son. You go down first. Since you have served as a knight's attendant before, let's become my deputy first. Tomorrow, gather all 200 soldiers recruited to the castle, and I will personally lead the training. Early in the morning, Diouf came down from the mountain and saw a group of people gathered in the middle hall of his castle. A young man was riding a horse in a circle in the field, and it was the son of the tax collector, Statuenko, who skillfully swung his sword left and right on the horse's back. The light of the sword flying up and down was like a chain of light. The scarecrow heads, as targets, were lightly cut off by Statuenko's magnificent dragline technique, which drew cheers from the standing peasant soldiers around. If the knight who rushed into the hall on that day was riding a warhorse, I wonder if he would still have a chance to stand here. Diouf couldn't help but speculate when he saw that Statuenko, who was just a servant knight, had such a smooth dragline technique and the ability to skillfully cut left and right on the horse. I don't know what kind of power regular knights with sharp spears, two-handed swords, and heavy armor would have in close combat. No wonder the main force of the kingdom's combat is still knights. The cheap cannon fodder troops, mainly farmers, cannot compete with these war machines that have been practicing killing since childhood. Sir, what do you think of these new recruits? The knowledgeable old butler was not interested in the display of the young Statuenko. As an old man who had served the Orthodox knight family for his whole life, these displays were just some fancy little tricks to make people shout. The task of recruiting soldiers this time was the old butler's concern. Diouf looked at the gathered peasant soldiers, most of whom were young and middle-aged, holding various weapons, from agricultural tools such as spikes and rakes to pig-slaughtering knives. When he saw the arrival of the lord, although everyone tried to pretend to be energetic, the long-term malnutrition still left marks on their faces and bodies. Her hair was fluffy like chicken coops, her face turned pale, and her entire formation looked disheveled. Seeing Diouf frown slightly, she said, "Can such a unit fight?" I reckon Statuenko can defeat them alone. Ah! These days are really. Du sighed, unable to do anything. It was just this kind of army that he had to smash the pot and sell iron, and he pieced together everything. The dozens of archers wearing various animal leather standing on the right side of the line caught the attention of the fat man. Although these people have relatively thin bodies, they have a thick and developed right arm and sharp and intimidating eyes. These should be the mountain hunters in various villages mentioned by the tax collector. These people still have a bit of military appearance, but their animal skin clothing made you think of Lembo, first 33 Lembo. Very good, very powerful. Du used the spiritual victory method to boost himself. He waved to the guard behind him, who was pushing a cart full of weapons. Take out all the weapons equipped this time. I can't let the people in my territory just kill the enemy like this, he said this time. Du brought out 200 weapons from the castle's arsenal to equip his first army. As an experienced knight family, he had nothing else, but these weapons and equipment were still piled up in the warehouse, accumulated over the years, and many were seized from the enemy's hands. There were about 1,000 of them, so it seems that the skinny fat hen also has some chicken bones. The farmers curiously gathered around the carriage filled with weapons. A few farmers curiously picked up a short sword and pretended to dance, their excited faces looking a bit pale. Sir, isn't this a bit too short? This is a guard sword for archers. We were killed before we even hit the enemy. They said the entire carriage is piled up with short swords that are only half the length of the sword, as well as human-high wooden shields specially designed for siege soldiers. These are armored equipped for archers on the battlefield, and they cannot directly engage with the enemy. If you encounter an attacking cavalry, the opponent's long spear can pierce your heart from 3 meters away. As an adjutant, Statuenko also curiously picked up a short sword from the car, waved it in his hand a few times, and then looked at the other things on the car, his face turning green with an unpleasant expression. First, remove all the equipment from the carriage. Du waved his hand in front of everyone in front of them, and the trembling fat on his face further confirmed Statuenko's conjecture. It's over. I've heard that the current lord is an idiot, and I knew I wouldn't be greedy for this money. Du looked around at the stunned soldiers, took down a tall wooden shield from the nearby wooden frame with his left hand, and held a wooden short sword with his right hand. He waved his hand to Statuenko, who was still in a daze, saying, "Come, let's give it a try." Statuenko hesitated for a moment, took a wooden spear from the weapon rack at the back, and placed a crossbar in his hand. Du swiftly charged forward, using his large shield to hold the spear in front of Statuenko tightly against him. Touch! Statuenko's spear, which was 3 meters long, was blocked by the shield in the initial strike and had no chance to thrust it out. The long spear sweep was already powerless, but it kept retreating helplessly until it reached the wall, gritting its teeth as it watched the close-fitting shield sway in front of its nose, but there was nothing it could do. Because Du had already relied on the cover of a large shield to charge within 1 meter, everyone stared intently at all of this, and everyone could see that within this short distance, Du's short sword was absolutely deadly. With just one assassination with limited movement space, he could easily kill Statuenko. The farmers, who were originally giggling, stopped laughing when they saw Statuenko, who was still majestic ahead, being knocked down by the foolish lord with this despicable yet effective action. Everyone found that a short sword with a big shield was so dangerous. Even the knight Statuenko was pushed into a desperate situation by this tactic. With the protective shield quickly approaches the enemy, shortens the distance, and uses a short sword to deliver a fatal blow. In highly dense melee, the Roman infantry phalanx, equipped with giant shields self-defense, javelins, short swords, and other close combat weapons, is like raising the handle of a hidden sharp sword, firing a fatal blow unintentionally. This once left a profound impression on Du, and it is also the purpose of Du's training this time. The javelin is being produced by the blacksmith in the castle, and 200 people can form a small square formation. This special unit will definitely surprise the enemy. Du threw the short sword and giant shield in his hand onto the ground. In just 1 month, you will be going to the battlefield. If you want to come back alive and receive a generous bounty, practicing these are your only opportunities. As the peasant soldier looked at some weapons, his eyes replaced the previous contempt with a kind of fanaticism. A knight rewards a gold coin, a lord rewards a piece of land. Many farmers are running towards the head of that silver coin. Although the front ones are tempting, these farmers do not think that those killing machines wearing heavy armor are something they can imagine, but just now, Duyu's demonstration made these distant and unattainable goals suddenly seem within reach, and the wild hope in his heart is beating: glory, gold coins, and land. Many farmers scrambled to jump onto the carriage and choose their weapons to weigh their hands, and Statuenko, who was dazed by the wall, felt a wave of fear as he looked at Duyu's back as he turned and left. This is a genius, or an idiot. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Unexpected Engagement. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Unexpected Engagement. Sir, we don't need those crappy short swords. We have our own sharp hunting knives, and those bulky javelins are not suitable for us. We have sharp arrows stained with demonic blood, and as long as we have enough arrowheads, we can shoot through the throats of all enemies. Hunter leader Kralisart found Duyu, who was about to return to the hall. As the leader of a mountain hunter, Kralisat has been leading his mountain hunter tribe to hunt in the nearby mountains. Recently, it was heard that the local lord had posted a high-value bounty summoning order, leading more than 10 hunters from his tribe to earn a bounty. Winter is approaching, and this money happens to help his tribe overcome the harsh winter. Magic blood. Duyu looked at the muscular hunter leader Kralisart in front of him for a moment. What is the magic blood in the hunter leader's mouth? Is there really no magic in this world? After coming here for a few months, Duyu did not realize that this world was not much different from his original world. At least there were no mysterious things beyond his cognitive scope. This is the magic blood, and we hunters usually carry some with us. As long as we infect the arrow with the magic blood before the war, the enemy who is shot by the arrow will not die, but their injured parts will be cut off. Hunter leader Kralisart saw Duyu's surprised expression on his face and took off a long hollow wooden barrel from his waist. He opened the cork plug that was stuffed with the barrel mouth, and the pungent smell from there made Duyu frown with sadness. Seeing Duyu's strange expression staring at the small wooden barrel filled with demonic blood, Kralisart smiled uncontrollably. Kralisart didn't know, but in fact, Duyu's heart was already in a state of excitement. The familiar pungent smell made Duyu, who used to faint at the smell of gasoline in his past life, feel nauseous. However, Duyu still held back his nausea and took the small wooden barrel from Kralisart's hand, pouring out some black gum-colored liquid from the barrel and smelling it. That's right, this is the smell of original tar. I didn't expect that there was oil exposed on the surface in the mountains near here. I couldn't help but anxiously ask, is there a boiling black liquid exposed on the surface of that Devil's Valley, and a continuous eruption of flames all year round? Lord, how do you know? Do you also know about the Devil's Valley? It's a place that only our mountain hunters can reach. Kralisart looked at Duyu with a panicked expression. The Devil's Valley among the hunters was the biggest secret of the hunter tribe. It is said to be the place where the human world connects with hell. Does this legendary lord also know about that place? I'll give you 100 gold coins, and you can prepare 500 barrels within half a month. A small wooden barrel that you can carry with you just now, filled with the magic blood you mentioned. Really? Your Highness, are you sure you need magic blood? Duyu's words surprised Kralisat and he shouted out in surprise. Many nobles who have been in contact with the hunters in the past only heard them infect the arrows with demon blood, and they angrily cursed the hunters as demon claws, let alone showing such great interest in demon blood like Duyu. Yes, it's the magic blood you're talking about. I'll keep this bucket as a sample, so you don't cut corners for me. Duyu closed the cork of the small wooden bucket, and although Kralisart looked a bit reluctant at the small wooden bucket taken by Duyu, he continued happily. With these raw tars, I can organize a phalanx infantry capable of throwing incendiary bombs. No matter what heavy knights or elite infantry you have, they will turn you into a roasted pig. Do you weighed the small wooden barrel in his hand and heard the sound of gurgling liquid shaking inside? He couldn't help but feel satisfied and fascinated. Raise your shield, take 3 steps forward. Thorn. 200 peasant soldiers arranged in 10 rows on the castle playground, under the command of Statuenko, neatly raised their giant shields in their hands and formed a tight shield wall to push forward. Although these peasant soldiers had only been trained for more than half a month, they had already taken on a bit of the smell of a regular army. Everyone remembers, when approaching 20 meters, bidding for a gun, drawing a short sword when approaching 2 meters, stabbing close to oneself, regardless of life or death, stabbing 10 times in a row without fully piercing, and not turning back, Statuenko shouted loudly to the peasant soldiers. These standardized actions and standards were conceived by the foolish lord whom he despised. Although Statuenko believed that an outstanding warrior should be a brave and skilled warrior, rather than a soldier who only knows how to make unified actions according to instructions, but it must be admitted that for these farmers who have never been to the battlefield, the various combat skills they have carefully taught are not as memorable as the simple assassination moves taught by that idiot lord. Sir, when we go to the battlefield, do we really just need to follow the command and we can survive, and we can also get rewards? Although Statuenko was still a teenager, the peasant soldiers knew that this somewhat limping disabled youth was once a servant knight fighting against the most ferocious Kyoto cavalry in the north, and no one dared to look down on this deputy officer who kept a straight face and shouted loudly at him all day. Yes, as long as you follow the method taught by the Lord, I believe you will definitely bring back these piles of gold coins. As the departure time approached, the dozen or so peasant soldiers gathered around him during rest anxiously asked Statuenko. The eager gaze made Statuenko, who had always been resilient, feel a sense of comfort against his heart. After nearly a month of training, Statuenko found himself having a slight sense of trust in these peasant soldiers he had trained. Statuenko did not explicitly state it, but he also knew that this time it was a campaign against the Lok barbarians who occupied the western mountainous areas. According to this training method, he may actually be able to gain benefits from those barbarians who had no combat methods. If he were to confront the Kujik cavalry in the north, he would have to wait for death. I don't know how the hunters in those mountainous areas have been trained by adults. Statuenko looked at the scorching sun above his head. In the corner of the side wall of the castle in the distance, dozens of recruited mountain hunters were practicing shooting under the command of that chubby and idiotic lord. I really don't know what kind of training the Lord has for these hunters who have been hunting and archery since childhood. Due to the remote isolation, Statuenko did not find a small package wrapped around the arrows of all hunters, and the original arrows were hidden inside. Due to changes in the original sharp arrows, these hunters were unable to control this new type of arrowhead very accurately, often shooting wildly due to insufficient estimation of force and wind speed. This has led these hunters, who pride themselves on their superb archery skills, to refer to this special arrowhead as the arrow of the wanderer. Although hunters were not yet able to accurately grasp the arrowheads prepared for firing tar bombs, Du was already satisfied with seeing arrowheads that could fly nearly 100 meters. This is originally a range attack weapon. As long as the arrow collides with the target, the small package wrapped in tar will be pierced by the sharp arrow inside, and the tar inside will scatter and splash. Coupled with rockets fired from behind, the scorching fire caused by tar can definitely catch the enemy off guard and cause great losses. How are the supplies ready? They will be leaving in a few days. Du, who returned to his bedroom, flipped through the list of supplies sent by the old butler. According to the custom of the kingdom, the army of nobles must bring their own 10 days of food to the gathering place, because during these 10 days, the nobles are considered to be serving the king's duty, so they must bring all their own food and necessary supplies. But after 10 days, the king had to bear all the food for the noble army on his own, so the king's war was never long, and the longest one was only 98 days. The thousands of aristocratic armies that gathered not only consumed His Majesty's food, but also carried a lot of royal belongings as food to pay off debts. This system effectively limits His Majesty the King's right to freely recruit lords from various regions, which can be said to have played a significant role in the stability of the kingdom today. I have prepared 200 people to eat food for 20 days. Tomorrow, I will have the kitchen carry the pickled food onto the supply carriage. Just now, the head of the Kyoto family came with his 2 daughters, and I have arranged them in the castle's guest room. I wonder if you have time to personally meet them. The old butler's eyes flickered as he looked at Duyu, who was flipping through the list. His hesitant expression made Duyu curious. The old butler rarely arranges his own itinerary on his own, but this time he unexpectedly asked if he wanted to meet the other party's messenger, which clearly suggests that there is something inconvenient to say. The Kyoto family. What's up with them? Take me to see them. Duyu still has some impressions of the Kyoto family. It was a small lord on the edge of his own territory, with only a few small villages under his control. In terms of title, he was just a small lord, far behind his own marquis. I think they might be here to discuss the engagement. The old butler hesitated as he saw the puzzled expression on his young master's face. The butler's words left Duyu standing there, who had just stood up. Engagement. Who does the Kyoto family have an engagement with? Duyu looked at the embarrassed old butler with a puzzled expression. The sudden appearance of this poor in-laws did surprise Duyu, who thought he was still the Diamond King. Last year, when the old master was seriously ill, he decided to make a marriage agreement with the nearby Kyoto family for the young master. Although this caused a lot of opposition within the family, the old master still insisted on making a marriage agreement with the Kyoto family. The old butler explained with a pale face. In fact, when Duyu thought about it, he understood that the old father with this body, in order to avoid his foolish son becoming the controlling puppet of the future female family, resolutely made a marriage contract with the most impoverished Kyoto family in his vicinity. Even if the Kyoto family's daughter became the mistress of the Falcon family, she would not be able to fully control the entire family due to her less noble background. This is probably also a kind of helpless fatherly love. Since it was arranged by my father, please arrange for me to meet them grandly in the hall tomorrow. Duyu waved to the old butler, feeling a bit confused. It turned out that he had a future wife in this world. Okay, I'll tell Lord Kyoto that I think his 2 daughters will be very happy. The old butler breathed a sigh of relief. Since the young master recovered from his foolish state to his current state, the old butler couldn't bear to see if this special engagement could continue. You haven't told me yet, which one am I engaged to? Duyu asked as he looked at the old butler who was about to bow down and leave his bedroom. The old housekeeper looked at Duyu strangely and finally made up his mind. Young master, what the master ordered for you is the sister's flower of the Kyoto family. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Congenital fetal breath. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Congenital fetal breath. The bright red front of the truck that collided head-on was so clear, and the devastating impact made Duyu feel like his head was being hit hard by a heavy object, with streams of heat splashing out from his body, like a duck pinched by its neck, wanting to shout out loud but unable to do so. The suffocation left Duyu gasping for breath. As the scene turned, Duyu saw his erect and stiff body burning with a crackling sound in the raging fire. The skin on the surface of his body was vaporized directly by the high temperature, and the scorching flames spewed out from his body, like a burning thin paper, quickly turning his whole body into ashes. Ah! Duyu opened his eyes, feeling suffocated that he couldn't shout out loud. With this frightened shout, it became clear and warm currents flowed through his body, with cold sweat flowing all over his body. Young master, do you need any help? The tired voice of the old butler came from outside the bedroom door. It seemed that his shout just now had awakened the old butler sleeping in the adjacent room. It's nothing, you can rest first. Duyu shook his head in a daze, as if he had not fully awakened from the nightmare just now. A gust of night wind passed through the semi-circular window of the castle, and Duyu felt cold all over before realizing that his clothes had been soaked through with cold sweat. What's going on? Duyu suddenly noticed a lubricating sensation coming from his body surface, which was the feeling of wind flowing around him. The invisible wind was like an invisible water flow flowing clearly around him, which surprised and stunned Du, who was originally confused. Du finally realized that the bedroom, which was originally as black as ink, was so clear that he could even see a plump big mouse nestled in the corner of the bedroom, chewing on the crumbs he had dropped from dinner. The whole world made Du feel different. Although he saw the original world, all kinds of sensations from his body told Du that it was a world he had never encountered before. Remembering the indescribable suffocation he felt in his dream, his whole body burning like fire, struggling to live or die, until he saw his body turn into ashes, and then connected with the changes that were happening now, Du felt a burst of ecstasy in his heart. Is this the innate fetal breath that Ne Jia Quan practiced to the fullest? It is said that when internal skill is practiced to a certain level, it can reach the innate level of death before life, because this level has been out of the range of people's understanding, and the body has become a system that can constantly self-circulate, just like the legendary monk said the second world. This is similar to the Taoist practice of becoming a Taoist after death, and the Buddhist practice of becoming a Buddha in the flesh after death. It is called the realm of fetal breath by martial artists, because they believe that while a person is in the mother's body, they cannot breathe the air outside the body, but can rely on the fetal breath inside the body to generate life and vitality, forming an integrated cycle of vitality and energy. From the moment a person leaves their mother's body, they breathe air, and turbid energy suddenly arises, vitality is cut off, and internal circulation is no longer present. Practicing martial arts is to stimulate internal potential, reconnect vitality, and return to the state of fetal rest before birth, in order to achieve the highest level of unity between heaven and earth, and cultivate the unity of heaven and humanity. I didn't expect to be able to cultivate the legendary innate realm in this world. It's true that fortune is dependent on misfortune, and misfortune is hidden within it. I don't know if this is God's compensation for his premature death. The old butler was stunned as he watched his own young master jump a few meters like an antelope between the steep rocks, and his left and right cliffs jump like smoke. If it weren't for his constant companionship with his young master in practicing this kind of jump, he would never have believed that the floating black shadow jumping like a flying eagle on the steep mountain top would be his own chubby young master, who was known as the idiot. Young master, Lord Kislato is already waiting for your reception in the hall, the old butler exclaimed in anger as he saw Du finally turn over in the air and lightly land on a protruding boulder not far away. He quickly ran over to remind him, panting heavily. Du stood on a giant rock, in the hunting mountain breeze, exuding an indescribable and refined calm demeanor. The old butler below exclaimed, I don't know why seeing the young master today feels like he's not the same person as before, but the difference is hard to tell. Last night, he accidentally discovered that he had reached the state of congenital stillbirth. Early in the morning, Du couldn't wait to come to the usual place for practicing martial arts. He really felt the mountain wind slowly descending and his body was unusually light. He had an impulse to go with the wind. With a movement of his heart, he had already drifted out for a few meters and had unknowingly wasted a morning in this valley. At this moment, reminded by the old butler, Du remembered that he almost forgot about meeting his father. In law. He quickly jumped to the ground and took the prepared dress from the old butler's hand. Lord Kislato was a thin and tall middle-aged man with a thin face. When he saw the old butler of the Falcon family accompanying a slightly obese young man into the hall, he quickly walked forward and anxiously waved his hand, Captain Dusta, you have finally arrived. This time, you must save the Kislato family. Seeing that there was only an anxious middle-aged man in front of him, Du couldn't help but glance around the hall in disbelief. Yes, this Lord Kislato was the only one waiting for him in the hall. His two fiancées' sisters, who had never met before, were not in the hall. This made Du, who had come here in a hurry, secretly disappointed, and his eagerness also cooled down a bit. The shrewd old housekeeper saw Du's face was a little strange. He knew that the young master must be unhappy because he didn't see the sisters' flowers of the Kislato family. He quickly helped the worried Kislato lord and asked, if you have anything to do, please tell me. I believe the young master will help you through the difficulties. Why didn't you see the two young ladies? It was all the Kyoto family who tore up the alliance without authorization. The head of the family, Kyoto, personally led 13 knights and 130 thugs to rob 2 villages in my territory, killed more than 40 farmers below me, and injured my captain of the guards. He threatened to take back the 2 daughters of the villains, which frightened my 2 daughters. They are still resting in bed, so we couldn't come together to see the adults. Lord Kyoto wept bitterly as he recounted the brutality of the Kyoto family, his eyes earnestly fixed on Duyu, the 13 regular knights, and 130 soldiers. Such powerful force was not something that he, a small lord with only 3 villages, could resist. This reminded him of Duyu, the future foolish son-in-law. Although the Falcon family has declined, the skinny camel is bigger than the horse. Moreover, Duyu still holds the title of Marquis and a rich basin. Even if he cannot compete with the Kyoto family, who are both marquests, he can at least intervene in the war between the 2 families. As for the frightened 2 daughters, they are just an excuse provided by Lord Kyoto. Seeing Duyu's solemn and contemplative expression, both the old butler and Lord Kyoto looked at him with a puzzled expression, unaware that Duyu was actually having his own little plan in his heart. My own farmers' soldiers have been trained very hard, but I have never had the opportunity to show these new soldiers blood. The army without blood will always be the new soldiers on the battlefield. This time there is such a good opportunity, why not let these new soldiers who have not seen blood practice their skills? If adults can let the Kyoto family withdraw, I can immediately send my 2 daughters over according to the original engagement, and I am willing to compensate the Kyoto family with 500 gold coins. Lord Kyoto saw Duyu's hesitant expression on his face, thinking that this mentally ill future son-in-law was thinking about his 2 beautiful daughters, and quickly made a promise. In fact, it was not the Kyoto family who tore up the treaty this time, but the poor and crazy Lord Kyoto who had the idea of getting rich and secretly organized local villagers to dress up as robbers and rob the Kyoto family's rich caravan trade. However, the caravan did not seize it and instead exposed his identity, which caused the Kyoto family to retaliate. Okay, I'll send someone to talk to the Kyoto family. You go back first and wait for my good news. Duyu heard a bit strange from Lord Kyoto's abnormal tone, but he didn't care. He secretly planned to send troops and had little interest in studying who was right and who was wrong. Watching Lord Kyoto leave the hall full of hope, Duyu turned to look at the embarrassed old butler. This time, Lord Kyoto definitely gave the old butler a lot of benefits, otherwise the old butler wouldn't speak for him like this. Duyu was thinking of changing the butler. 1 emperor, 1 courtier. I have always despised this approach, and I didn't expect to have this idea now. Duyu sighed inwardly, go find Statuenko and say I have something important to talk to him about. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. First Battle Night Attack. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Night Attack. In the first battle the cold moon of late autumn hangs high in the sky, and dark clouds flow like water in the dark sky. Duyu lay crouching in the bushes, carefully observing the simple wooden campsite built by the crescent-shaped lake at the foot of the mountain. The chosen location for this campsite was very good, fully utilizing the high soil slope of the small river embankment by the lake to build a wooden fence. Outside the campsite, there was a small river up to 2 meters wide passing by, like a simple small castle. From a higher position on the mountain, it can be clearly seen that hundreds of soldiers dressed in light leather armor are sitting around the campfire, enthusiastically watching 2 sturdy men fighting against each other in the middle of the campfire. Although they are using wooden long swords, the sound of the wooden sword colliding can also be clearly heard in the distance, indicating the strength used by these 2 men, as if they were fighting in life and death. A strong man finally struck the waist of another strong man with a wooden sword in his hand, and then used the handle of the wooden sword to strike the unconscious and painful opponent with a backhand, causing the soldiers around to howl incessantly. Sir, this should be the army of the Kyoto family who attacked Lord Kyoto. Look at the eagle-billed family flag on the tent, it should be the Kyoto family's vulture battle flag. Sitting beside Du, Statuenko pointed to the military flag floating on the most luxurious tent next to the campfire, his face cold as he looked at the Kyoto family's army still excitedly howling in the distance. This time, Du decided to personally lead the 200 newly trained farmers to ambush the army of the Kyoto family, but was strongly opposed by Statuenko. Although these 200 farmers had undergone a month of arduous training, their chances of winning against the Kyoto family, known as the battlefield vulture, were too small. Newcomers cannot defeat the veterans of the Kyoto family, let alone 13 Orthodox knights who have experienced countless battles. Statuenko felt that his lord must have lost his head with passion and was preparing to use 200 farmers to confront the battlefield veterans led by knights. Veterans are also newcomers who have never seen blood before. No matter how well they are trained, they are also newcomers. What about knights? Have you forgotten how you were forced to death by shield walls to the corner? You hope that the army you train will never be able to go to the battlefield, and you hope that they will always become the new recruits in others' mouths. If you hope so, then what are you training them for? Just be killed by the enemy. The harsh words spoken by Du left the resilient Statuenko speechless. His lord could never guess what he was thinking. The army that formed this special attack method was like this, and the never-ending magic rocket arrow was like this. He could never keep up with his lord's footsteps. Command everyone to be prepared. Du waved his hand coldly to Statuenko beside him. Everyone was trying to suppress their breath, which was not intentional. All the soldiers were new recruits, and training to kill and actually killing were completely different things. Everyone was nervous and didn't dare to breathe. This was also Du's first battle, and he was also a newcomer on the battlefield. Du felt that his fingers holding the short sword had become a bit stiff due to excessive force. The lush shrubs on the outskirts of the camp provided good cover for Du and the peasant soldiers. The entire army had already lurked forward to a distance of about 100 meters from the Kyoto camp, and further ahead was the range that the sentries could discover. Although most of the soldiers were surrounded by the campfire, the sentries could still be seen walking back and forth on the rudimentary watchtower of the camp. Can you shoot down the sentry on the west watchtower? Du turned his head to look at the hunter leader Kralisart following behind him. Kralisart, who has always been hunting in the mountains, was startled by his shiny eyes. These are just a pair of beast's eyes. Du could clearly see a rudimentary stable set up in the upper left corner of the camp, with over a dozen warhorses gnawing on the withered grass in the wooden trough, which should be the warhorses of the 13 knights. Whenever I think of Statuenko's fluent and magnificent knight dragline technique performed in the castle square, it makes Du shudder. If these legitimate knights, who were killed as professions, were allowed to ride their horses, even if their warriors cooperated seamlessly, these new recruits on the battlefield would definitely fall more than half. This is also why Du chose to launch a surprise attack at night. As long as these knights cannot ride on horses, no matter how powerful the knights are, they are just skilled infantry. As long as they encounter well-trained shield wall tactics, they will definitely be pushed to a dead end. Sir, the wind tonight is too strong. It's difficult to take down the sentry at such a long distance. At least I can advance within 40 meters before I have a chance to take down the sentry. Kralisart looked at Du and shook his head regretfully. An arrow shot the moving sentry 50 meters away, which was still possible in windless areas. However, the campsite was set up by the lake, and the strong wind blowing from the open lake surface allowed the arrowhead to accurately hit the moving target. It's easy to shoot down the sentry, Statuenko. I'll sneak in and take down the warhorses first. When the camp becomes chaotic, you'll organize a soldier's shield formation to launch an attack. Du ignored Statuenko's hesitation and turned to disappear into the dark night, only to see a black figure quickly approaching the camp. Du quickly slid forward against the grass and then bounced his feet, like a flying fish leaping out of the water, easily crossing a small river about 2 meters wide outside the camp. With a few small jumps, he had already stuck to the fence outside the camp. Finally, He used his hands to support his fat body, like a gecko lying in the corner, easily flipping over a wooden fence that was as high as 3 meters. The agile body movements exhibited by the idiot lord stunned everyone, even the hunter leader Kralasat, who always thought he was as light as a swallow and regarded high mountains and valleys as flat, was completely taken aback. Is this guy still human? Duke climbed over the 3-meter high wooden fence and jumped down, feeling a soft landing under his feet. Due to Duke's quick movements, he did not catch the attention of the sentinels. With the memory of observing on the mountain just now, Duke easily found the stable where the warhorses were locked, but only then did he realize that he had missed an important question. How can these horses be solved? The vitality of horses is very strong. Unless they chop off the horse's head with one knife, it's difficult to kill them directly. A fallen warhorse will definitely cause other warhorses to shout. Duke looked at the warhorses in the stable and fell into a predicament for a while. Several warhorses in the stable also looked at Duke as an unwelcome guest with bulging eyes. Animals are always much more sensitive than humans. Yes, set fire to the horses. If these warhorses are frightened, they will definitely run around. Duke suddenly fixed his eyes on the torch on the stable pillar, then took the torch burning pine oil from the stable pillar, opened the wooden fence door of the stable, and set fire along the thatch on the top of the stable. The night wind by the lake was strong, and the fire quickly spread to the entire stable. The scorching flames immediately frightened the warhorses and they tried to rush out of the fence. For a moment, the sound of wind, fire, and the frightened screams of the warhorses mixed together. Seeing the great situation on this side of the stable, the Kyoto family soldiers, led by several knights in armor, rushed towards the stable in panic, surrounded by the campfire. However, they did not notice that the soldiers on the watchtower had been shot down by several cold arrows shot from the bushes outside the camp. What are you all in a daze, waiting for the enemy to shoot at you? Quickly, go over a few people from the wooden fence and open the camp gate. Statuenko hurriedly commanded these newly arrived soldiers on the battlefield. The sentry has been taken care of by the hunters, but these newcomers are still daydreaming under the fence, not knowing what to do after rushing under the fence. This self-proclaimed as a furious scolding from the commander, Statuenko. Upon hearing Statuenko's words, the equally panicked and excited peasant soldiers finally realized. Several agile figures began to climb up the wooden fence, but at that moment, the camp door creaked open from inside, revealing Duke's chubby figure. What are you still waiting for? Group up with 6 people and form an assault formation as trained. Remember, the enemy hasn't finished killing, don't turn back, those who turn back will kill. Duke saw the soldiers outside making a mess and cursed angrily. At this moment, the Kyoto family soldiers had already noticed the abnormality here. A knight and a dozen soldiers rushed to the camp gate first. The peasant soldiers in formation can even feel the panting sound of the Kyoto family soldiers on the opposite side breaking through the wind box. Assault! With Statuenko's shout, the 30-team sharp shell shield wall quickly moved forward, like a moving mountain in the dark, pressing against the enemy who was stunned in the face. Enemy attack. Enemy is charging in. The knight across from him saw the black shadows of people moving in the dark night, and immediately panicked. Although he had just discovered from the fire in the stable that someone was intentionally causing trouble, he did not expect to encounter an enemy knight attack. Someone dared to attack the Kyoto family. The mournful shouts of the knights attracted dozens of soldiers in the distance who were extinguishing the fire. Looking at the approaching shield wall, these veteran soldiers drew out their weapons and calmly laid out 2 straight lines. This is the traditional formation of infantry in field combat, which is conducive to placing the attack power of each soldier in the front. The moving shield wall finally collided with the heavily prepared Kyoto soldiers. The sound of weapons hitting the shield was as continuous as the sound of drums. With occasional pop, pop sounds, more than 10 Kyoto soldiers who were supported by the shield wall quickly fell down. This inexplicable death method shocked the Kyoto soldiers who rushed forward from behind. Be careful, their short sword. These despicable bastards. A knight regressed in grief and shouted in pain, with an unfinished short sword inserted into his blood-stained waist. It seemed that the exquisite armor he was wearing had caught the peasant soldier's short sword, and the knight who had been ambushed survived. This shout caused many soldiers who had already been supported by the shield wall to retreat one after another, but more than half of them had already fallen. According to pre-training, the shield wall had already broken through the defense line of the Kyoto family and was gathering from both sides towards the center, like dumplings wrapped in stuffing. The soldiers of the Kyoto family were surrounded in the middle. This is a massacre, a unilateral massacre. Statuenko felt like he was going crazy. From the soldiers he had just fought with, these were all veterans who had been on the battlefield. Although they were attacked by advantageous enemies, they still composed a defensive formation to resist, but all of this was vulnerable in front of this strange shield wall. Statuenko even saw one of the most cowardly peasant soldiers close their eyes and thrust a soldier onto a shield, stabbing him to death with a short sword. "Surrender. Or die," Diyu waved his hand to stop the soldiers from attacking. In the circular formation formed by the shield wall, there were only a dozen or so soldiers still resisting, and there were only 3 knights wearing scales. This made Diyu, who had always been on guard against knights' attacks, take a breath of anger. It seems that most knights are not at the camp. "We surrender, we demand fair treatment, and our family will pay us a ransom." The 3 knights first threw down their weapons, and further resistance was meaningless. The knights' loyalty was also limited. "Where is your Marquis of Kyoto? Where is he?" Diyu was very upset about the lords in the camp who had not found any enemies. The lords were the big fish, and these small fish and shrimp were not worth much money. He went to negotiate with Captain Stormy at Lord Kislato's castle. The prisoner's answers made Diyu even more puzzled. What was going on? He fought and killed the enemy here, but his cheap father-in-law started negotiating with the enemy. The feeling of being deceived made Diyu furious. "This old fox, see how I'll deal with you. Let's go, take these people down, pack up everything, and go to Lord Kislato's castle," Diyu shouted to the soldiers around who were cleaning the battlefield. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. The Desire of the Army. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. The Desire of the Army. "Sir, look what I've found, there should be at least 300 gold coins here," Statuenko said excitedly as he secretly dragged Diyu into a black tent in the upper left corner of the camp. Statuenko, who has been living in the military camp for a long time, knows that the military's usual location for collecting supplies is usually in the upper left corner of the middle tent, because this position is close to the center, with tight defense and not attracting attention, especially when he was on the mountain just now. Statuenko carefully observed that only a few tents in the middle had no lights and were guarded by sentinels, all of which matched the characteristics of material tents. Therefore, as soon as the battle was over, he immediately ran into this strange tent by the light of the torch. Diyu saw several opened red-brown wooden boxes filled with various sparkling things. Diyu felt that these boxes should be all the goods collected by the Marquis of Kyoto from the village. He didn't expect that the Marquis of Kyoto had worked hard for so long, and he had actually bought himself as a migrant for nothing. "Go out and call out a few people to carry these boxes to the center of the camp." Diyu covered the boxes and his words stunned Statuenko, who was excited. He had no idea what kind of madness the Lord, who was full of strange ideas, had gone. According to tradition, these discovered spoils of war all belonged to the Lord. Hunters were busy catching more than a dozen frightened and fleeing warhorses, while peasant soldiers were taking off their armor and picking up enemy weapons from the corpses. Although these were not worth much money, they could at least be considered their own spoils of war. Although this raid easily defeated the enemy, 3 peasant soldiers were still killed and 8 were injured to varying degrees. Among them, 4 were stabbed by their own people in a crowded queue. Seeing the dead companions and wounded soldiers howling, the entire team was filled with an indescribable silence. Suddenly, everyone saw their lord leading several peasant soldiers carrying several large wooden boxes to the center of the camp. stopping their work and surrounding them. Diyu looked around at the soldiers gathered around him. With everyone's puzzled gaze, Diyu suddenly kicked one of the large boxes on the side. The box suddenly bumped and was kicked into pieces. The belongings loaded inside rolled and bounced on the ground, crowding together and emitting a metallic collision sound. The sparkling wealth spilled out made everyone's eyes look straight. I am very satisfied with your performance today. As I promised, these treasures belong to you true warriors. Everyone can receive a gold coin as a reward, and those who died or were injured can receive an additional gold coin. Diyu's words made the entire camp completely boil. A gold coin is the income of a farmer for 20 years. Under the high exploitation of lords and landlords, many farmers have never seen what a gold coin looks like in their lifetime. Seeing a silver coin is something worth boasting about in the village. These peasant soldiers didn't expect to receive a gold coin as a reward tonight. Their originally low morale suddenly skyrocketed, and everyone exclaimed excitedly, "Your Highness, you are the most generous person in the entire kingdom." A wounded soldier even covered his face in excitement and cried. The soldier thought he had not received a high reward and had to return to the village with his scar, but now the Lord's generosity is enough to propose marriage to the wealthiest woman in the village, and even to buy a large piece of land. He can become a leisurely small landlord and live a comfortable life for the rest of his life. As long as you are willing to follow me, I guarantee that what you can get will be much more than what you get tonight. Diyu is very satisfied with the excitement displayed by the peasant soldiers now. The army is like a bloodthirsty wolf, not only with sharp claws and teeth, but also with a thirst for food. He wants to train these ordinary peasant names into true warriors who crave battle. I believe that if an enemy appeared in front of these peasant soldiers now, they would definitely fiercely attack and bite the enemy into pieces. Tomorrow, they will lead this eager army to completely tear up the Marquis of Kyoto. Lord Kislato's castle was not very far from the camp of the Kyoto family. As the sky had just brightened, Diyu, who was walking, could already see the low stone castle belonging to Lord Kislato in the distant village shrouded in morning mist. The entire small castle is built on the low hills and slopes behind the village. The outer walls of the castle are randomly picked up from the surrounding mountains, with large and small gravel blocks piled up to form a half-moon-shaped low stone wall that is about 30 meters wide and 2 meters high. A half-moon-shaped gap is exposed in the middle. The outer defense of the castle was rudimentary, without even a moat. A deep pit was dug along the city wall outside the castle, and only a wooden watchtower was set up around the main entrance. A wide and long wooden board was hung to lay on the deep ditch as a suspension bridge, giving Diyu the feeling of a small cannon tower built by the Japanese. On the top of the castle floats a long tailcoat without a coat of arms, because the lord is not among the noble ranks of the kingdom, but rather a title bestowed upon his subordinates or relatives by the lord, so he is not qualified to embroider a unique coat of arms on the flag. Sir, the white tents on the right side of those castles should be the residence of Marquis Kyoto. I heard that there is a large sheep farm in his territory, and these tents are sewn from sheepskin. Even if it rains, they won't leak, but they are all good things. One tent can sell 3 gold coins on the black market. Hunter leader Kralisat excitedly pointed to the dozen or so white leather tents sewn with sheepskin outside the small stone castle, and looked at those tents with a look like seeing bulging money bags. Last night's battle allowed the hunters to each receive a gold coin, and earning so much money so easily made them excited. They only hoped that their lord could fight a few more battles, so that they could bring their full wallet back to their women and children to spend a comfortable winter. Originally, Hunter leader Kralisat was not optimistic about her employer's night raid, but she never expected her employer to be so magical. With just 200 farmers who had just trained for a month, she easily defeated the Marquis of Kyoto, known as the War Vulture. Especially when counting the spoils of war after the war, Diyu not only announced that he would distribute all the loot looted from the village by the Marquis of Kyoto to the soldiers, but also added an additional gold coin to each of the 3 farmers who died in battle and the 8 injured. This made all the farmers and soldiers rejoice, privately claiming that his lord was the most generous person in the kingdom. The long trombone sounded from a small castle in the distance, indicating that Lord Kislato's attempt to make peace was not going well. From afar, dozens of soldiers ran out of the white tent in front of the castle, gathering behind the tent with the eagle-billed vulture flag flying on top. They slowly moved out a pile of wood like ants, and started building things. It's a small siege catapult. I didn't expect them to still carry this. As the building gradually revealed its rough outline, Statuenko, who had participated in the siege battle, whispered softly. Statuenko's words on the side made Duyu's doubts suddenly clear up. After a while, this cunning Marquis of Kyoto had no sincerity in negotiations. This time, he came with a small siege and catapult, intending to completely swallow up his restless poor neighbor around him. Unfortunately, my wall-grass father-in-law is just a lord, not even a formal noble title. If he were to be occupied by this cunning Marquis of Kyoto, no one would interfere with this matter. With the sharp friction of the machinery, a diamond-shaped stone found from a nearby soil slope was thrown in an arc by a newly assembled small catapult and landed on the outer wall of the castle, smashing a piece of gravel. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. People's War. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. People's War. A diamond-shaped stone weighing several tens of pounds roared and hit the front of the watchtower next to the trench. With a loud and violent impact, the sharp diamond corners of the stone smashed off the right half of the wooden tower. The wood inside the tower scattered like a firecracker thrown into the sky and exploded. Duyu, who was lurking in the distance, secretly licked his tongue. He didn't expect this temporary catapult to be so fierce. There must be siege warriors adjusting their catapults below, otherwise they wouldn't be so accurate. Statuenko, who had participated in official siege battles, didn't expect this tattered catapult to be so accurate. It only took more than an hour, after adjusting left and right about 10 times, to accurately hit the target. In previous siege battles, there were many situations where they had hit the target even after hitting it for a whole day. Siege man. This is the first time Duyu has heard this unfamiliar new term. Duyu Guang seems to be someone related to siege based on his name. Is there still a dedicated siege engineer in this world? They are the people who are specifically responsible for manufacturing and adjusting siege weapons. These people are very valuable, and the entire kingdom has only heard of them in the king's army. I didn't expect to find them here, Statuenko explained quickly. Seeing the puzzled expression on Duyu's face, Statuenko's words brought joy to Duyu's heart. Duyu had long discovered that even the smallest lords in this world had to find ways to build a stone resting place for himself. If he could have a siege warrior in his hand, then these lords who liked to hide in turtle shells would be his own money bags. He would knock whoever he wanted. Seeing that the obstacles ahead had been cleared, the soldiers of the Marquis of Kyoto, who were watching the excitement outside the castle, held up the siege ladder made of temporarily cut down tree trunks and shouted forward. The first few soldiers used their long wooden boards to build a deep ditch outside the castle, and the passage to the inside of the castle was already open. Sir, the castle should be about to be breached. Do we also need to prepare to attack? Seeing more than a dozen heavily armored knights wearing vests slowly moving towards the castle, Hunter leader Kralisat saw that the troops of the Marquis of Kyoto outside the castle had all shown their deadly backs to themselves, and excitedly rubbed their hands. That's all money, as long as the adult gives the order. Kralisat thinks she can definitely shoot an arrow through the enemy's neck while the enemy on the other side hasn't turned around yet. A soldier has 1 silver coin, a knight has 1 gold coin, and there is also a lord. Whoever catches them, I will reward them with a piece of land. Everyone is ready to shoot, let's go kick the buttocks of these Kyoto people. Duyu shouted in a low voice to the soldier lying behind him, waiting for the moment when the army of the Marquis of Kyoto breaks through the castle. As his bounty was thrown out, Duyu could clearly feel that the collective breathing behind him had noticeably stopped for a moment. When it sounded again, it was noticeably dull, but the red eyes of the soldiers behind him emitted a burning desire. At this moment, the Marquis of Kyoto would never have thought that his camp behind him had been destroyed overnight, and his defenseless back had completely exposed to this cheap, yellow sparrow. Du buried his body and quickly led the soldiers behind him towards the front, constantly hearing the rustling sound of grass and trees beside him. Suddenly, his eyes lit up and he ran out nearly 100 meters in one breath. The luxurious sheepskin tent of Marquis Kyoto was only a few meters away from him, and the hunters following him began to bow and shoot arrows, aiming towards the enemy with their backs to him. Touch! The dull sound of a collision came from the small stone castle in the distance. It seemed that the Marquis of Kyoto had not yet noticed the unusual situation behind him and had started organizing soldiers to attack the castle gate. Du saw the Marquis of Kyoto leading more than 10 knights immediately supervising the battle behind dozens of soldiers, with the triangular eagle-beaked flag flying high in the wind on his long spear. Shooting assault. Startunko, who had emerged from the grass beside him, suddenly pulled out his curved sword from his waist. Since being forced to death by Du's shield in the corner, Startunko, who felt ashamed of his knighthood, no longer used his knightly sword, but instead used a smoother and more effective grassland curved sword that could use the drag knife technique. The peasant soldiers following behind drew out their rifles and charged towards the busy and happy Marquis of Kyoto, with Du and Statuenko as the center. The fluttering lord flag was like a tempting sign, and everyone's ears echoed with the words of their lord, "Kill the lord and grant land." The hunters' poison arrows shot from behind were like deadly locusts, and the unprepared soldiers of the Marquis of Kyoto were instantly knocked over by more than 20. This sudden chaos caused the bewildered soldiers of the Marquis of Kyoto to panic. Enemy! Turn around, there's an enemy behind you. The Marquis of Kyoto, who noticed something was wrong, felt uneasy when he saw the arrowheads behind the soldiers. The knights who were originally standing next immediately also turned their heads. Although the enemy came too suddenly, the Marquis of Kyoto believed that as long as he could lead the knights to charge, he could still win the battle. Seeing the knight on the opposite side start to turn, Du took down a circular double-headed spear from behind. The two ends of the iron handle were like a square-pointed spear, which was the exclusive weapon specially crafted by the castle blacksmith by Du based on his concentrated internal strength. This is created by Du based on the style of the supporting flag worn by the characters in the Chinese opera, Peking opera. There are a total of 7 flags, which are carried behind the back, like a curved fan that unfolds on one side. They can be used as melee attacks or long-range projectiles, and can also serve as defensive weapons when placed behind the back. They are indeed powerful weapons for killing. Du once tried to exert all his strength, and with just one shot, he stabbed a pair of high-quality steel armor with both sides shining brightly. This completely stunned Statuenko, who stood beside him with immense confidence in the knight's heavy armor. On the battlefield, the knight, wearing heavy armor and extremely powerful, was not like paper paste in front of his divine ruler. "What kind of people are you?" Seeing a large group of strange soldiers charging up from behind with javelins, the Marquis of Kyoto's questioning was not yet spoken. The javelin across from him was already shooting towards him like a heavy rain. At such close range, such dense javelins immediately scared the veteran knight who had been in battle. He even forgot to raise his long knight's shield to block it. What surprised the Marquis of Kyoto was that none of the hundreds of spears had hit him. Instead, he shot his purebred Wickian warhorse, which he had bought with a lot of money, into a hedgehog. The horse, which fell to the ground in an instant, fiercely threw the Marquis of Kyoto off the horse's back. Wearing knightly armor weighing several tens of pounds, the old Marquis of Kyoto landed heavily on the ground like a pile of iron lumps after flying for more than 10 meters. His heavy armor was torn apart by the heavy impact on the ground, and blood gushed out of the poor Marquis of Kyoto's mouth. My body trembled unnaturally for a few times and then remained motionless. This unexpected phenomenon made Du, who was originally planning to perform gun through knight's armor, take a deep breath and say, "They are all a group of lunatics." According to post-event statistics, 175 out of 200 peasant soldiers were shot by the Marquis of Kyoto holding a flag, which made you feel helpless and lament. The most terrifying thing is the vast ocean of people's war. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Fighting Will. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Fighting Will. Sir, what do you think these knights should do? It's not a way to keep going like this. Due to the unexpected death of Marquis Kyoto, the remaining dozens of Kyoto soldiers fled. Although more than a dozen knights under Marquis Kyoto were still struggling to the death in the shield wall composed of peasant soldiers, the knights without warhorses were at most a warrior wearing heavy armor. Seeing that each of these dozen or so knights was wearing full body armor weighing tens of pounds and could still tenaciously strike the approaching shield wall with their infantry and swords, causing the farmers holding the shields to stumble and fall, you couldn't help but feel proud of his decision to spend a lot of money equipping the farmers with javelins. If it weren't for these panicked knights who were surrounded by farmers and stabbed their warhorses with javelins before they could fully run them, they wouldn't have been forced to dismount and engage in a trapped animal battle, like they are now. Perhaps my new army will be slaughtered in the opposite direction by these brave knights. A fully armed heavy cavalry team is not something that my semi-skilled soldiers with light leather armor can fight against. You bandits, robbers, you have killed the noble Marquis of Kyoto, and the entire kingdom will not let you go. You will be nailed alive on wooden donkeys, allowing hungry wolves wandering in the wild to eat into empty shells. Among the besieged knights, a knight with a red long feather on top of his mask shouted angrily as he looked at the increasingly tight shield wall, "These knights are not fools either. The mysterious soldiers who emerged from behind are obviously well-trained farmers. According to the kingdom's laws, if rebellious farmers kill their lords, they will all suffer torture and die. The shield wall in front of me is becoming increasingly tight. From the initial chaos to now, I have learned how to form several layers of shield walls to block my several breakouts. Now, only by making the enemy's hearts float can there be a little hope of standing out. If you don't surrender, you'll die." Do you saw these knights wearing heavy armor? Although their armor was pounded with a crisp sound by the short swords of his peasant soldiers, it couldn't harm their bodies at all. Unable to help feeling angry, he faced the most tenacious knight who resisted. With his wrist straightened and his heart moved, his blood surged. His right hand, holding a double-headed armor-piercing spear, was twice as thick as his left. A silver flash flashed from Duyu's hand, and the whistling sound of his double-headed armor-piercing guns made nearby Statuenko feel his ears suddenly stunned, as if he was in a fierce storm at that moment. The knight's heavy armor in the distance didn't even make a crisp tapping sound, only a pop sound was heard, and the sound of being stabbed into the body by a sharp weapon was heard. As demonstrated before, the magnificent and heavy armor was pierced through like a piece of paper, and the fierce internal force directly blasted a big hole in the knight's back. Blood and organs burst out of the armor like being squeezed, frightening several nearby knights who were covering each other and breaking through. Their faces turned pale, and they retreated in succession, being sprayed with blood all over their faces. Wizards. You have evil wizards. The bloody scene before us reminded the stubborn knights of the most evil and ferocious wizard in legend. It is said that many noble families raise their own unique wizards. It is said that wizards can foresee the fate of their families, prepare deadly poison, plan and strategize for the Lord, and fight alongside the army. Some of them also possess powerful powers, such as the chief wizard in the palace, the great wizard of Et, who has the ability to summon giant fireballs, and the great wizard of Giza, the Duke of Northern Yorksburg, who can cast spells to paralyze enemy warhorses. If you don't surrender, go die. Seeing how powerful your lord was, the surrounding peasant soldiers shouted out one after another. These iron knots that didn't penetrate with knives and guns annoyed the farmers. If it weren't for a month of training and tempting rewards, these farmers would have let them go long ago. We are soldiers of the nearby Falcon family, at the request of Lord Kestela, who came to fight against the bandits who plundered the village. You can choose to surrender or die. Statuenko saw that the knight who had just broken through was completely shocked by this violent shot, and quickly shouted at the already panicked knight. Hearing that the soldiers around were not bandits who killed and looted, but the army of the legitimate lords, the resistance of the knights also weakened. The knight with long red feathers first raised his large sword in his hand and placed it on the ground in front of the general eye. "Since you are a lord, we can surrender, but we demand that you do not insult our lord's body. The family will use a large sum of money to redeem the body. Sure, I won't offend a deceased nobleman. As long as you surrender, I can give you knights fair treatment. I only ask for money and won't kill anyone." Diu looked at the knights in a circle with a cold expression, constantly flipping his fingers and playing with the second double-edged armor-piercing spear that had just been removed, constantly spinning on the faces of several knights, like a hungry wolf staring at a flock of sheep. The knights who were being targeted instinctively lowered their proud heads, avoiding Diu's gaze. A cold-blooded grin shone on his face, and his eyes were filled with a hungry and murderous look that made Statuenko feel that this should be the true face of his lord. Everyone thought that the once famous Falcon family had fallen, but now it seems that all of this is too wrong. Statuenko believed that as long as these knights showed any signs of resistance, his lord would not hesitate to stab him in the chest with a piercing spear, even wearing thick full-body armor. Boring. The knights saw that Diu had already agreed to their request, and began to step out one by one in order. They put down their swords and sat down on the ground in a very impolite manner. "I'm exhausted." The faces of the knights, covered in heavy armor, were revealed from the armor they had opened. It seemed that these knights who fought in heavy armor had already exhausted their stamina. If it weren't for the fact that these bandits would kill people and silence them, they would probably have surrendered long ago. Although the lord has died, his stamina has long been exhausted, and he is trapped in a tight encirclement. These knights still strive to break through time and time again. It is these exhausted knights who have knocked their peasant soldiers upside down, which has surprised Diu beside him and made him secretly admire him. "It is truly the ultimate force of the kingdom," he said. "I don't know when my soldiers under me will have this unwavering, fighting spirit." End of this chapter. 10. Chapter 10 The Benefits of Warriors. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 The Benefits of Warriors. Dear Dusta, it's great that you arrived in time. If it's any later, my castle will be occupied by this despicable and shameless Marquis of Kyoto. You are truly the protector bestowed upon me by God. Seeing that all the stubborn knights had put down their weapons, Diu began to command his soldiers to clean the battlefield. The dozen or so valuable sheepskin tents were all taken into Diyu's pocket. Although the outcome of this battle was not yet known, just these dozen tents and the knight's full armor were a considerable income. Although Marquis Kyoto was not captured alive this time, he was not allowed to escape. The body was also a large sum of money. If the successor of the Kyoto family wants to rightfully inherit the position of the head of the family, they must spend a lot of money to redeem the body of the old marquis. Just as Diu was cheerfully commanding his soldiers to clean the battlefield, his cheap father-in-law, Lord Kestela, ran out of the castle wearing a shabby lock armor and carrying more than 10 servants. With a face full of grievances, he hugged Diu and cried loudly, which made Diu, who was still tidying up the battlefield, angrily curse. "I fought in bloody battles ahead, but you are negotiating with the enemy here. If you can't give me a reasonable explanation, I will send someone to reclaim your territory. Take back my territory." All right, I don't want to stay in this rundown place for a long time. You take back my territory. It's better for me to become a knight under your command than to stay here and bear the revenge of the Kestel family. To Diyu's surprise, Lord Kestela not only showed no fear when he heard that his territory was to be reclaimed, but also showed a joyful expression on his face. Even his originally disheveled expression seemed to radiate an uplifting aura, and he was deeply moved and tearful. "Sir, reclaiming an independent lord's territory requires compensation for titles and land." Seeing his lord's inexplicable dullness, Deputy Statuenko approached with an embarrassed expression and whispered in Diyu's ear. According to the kingdom's laws, the annexation of an independent lord's territory requires a certain amount of property and land compensation to be given to the lord in order to continue the lord's bloodline. It is precisely this law that ensures that although the nobles within the kingdom sometimes engage in constant warfare, as long as they do not rebel against the king, their bloodline can always last long. Many knights themselves are descendants of previous lords. This time, Lord Kestala not only disguised himself as a robber to rob the Kestal family's caravan, but also colluded with the Falcon family to ambush the Kestal Marquis, resulting in his death in battle. Lord Kestala had already planned to run away, and staying here would definitely be a dead end. The revenge anger of a Marquis family is not something that this small lord can bear. Now, his caring son-in-law is willing to reclaim his territory, which of course makes Lord Kestala ecstatic. Let's take it back. Fortunately, his cheap father-in-law only has 3 villages. Diyu sighed to himself. The original owner of this body seemed really introverted, and he didn't even know much about popular knowledge. If possible, I would like to meet my 2 fiancés. Diyu sat down in the castle hall of Lord Kestala. The 2 sides had just agreed on the matter of reclaiming their territory. Diyu allocated 2 villages to Lord Kestala from a dozen or so villages near his castle in exchange for 3 of his villages. Of course, but my 2 daughters are still learning aristocratic etiquette from Mrs. Ravenna at Morin Castle. I'm afraid they won't be back until next autumn, so I'll bring them to pay respects to the adults immediately. They'll be 13 years old next year, and they can have their wedding. Lord Kestala, with a relieved expression, picked up the village deed from the table and handed it over to Deputy Statuenko, 13 years old. The age that Lord Kestala vomited out startled Diyu, who was sitting in the main seat of the hall. After a long time, his fiancée sisters were still 2 13-years-old girls. Don't worry. Don't worry. Now that it's settled, I will lead the army back first. Diyu stood up from the main seat embarrassed. No matter whether the sisters are beautiful or not, Diyu is not evil enough to destroy the little girl. Sir, this battle killed a total of 138 ordinary soldiers, captured 17 knights, received a ransom of 3,500 gold coins, allocated 16 villages, and had a population of 3,786 people. Statuenko respectfully handed a stack of thick data tables and village headcounts to Diyu. Statuenko knew that the recent battle in Lord Kestala's territory had made his lord a small fortune. In order to redeem the body of the unlucky Marquis of Kyoto and the captured family knight squadron, the Kyoto family paid an additional 3,000 gold coins and had to cut off 13 nearby villages in order to redeem all the prisoners, except for the knight with red feathers fluttering on his head, who was the Iron Shield Knight of Story, the captain of the guard of the Marquis of Kyoto. Due to the lord's suffocation and death, Story, the captain of the guard, had been stripped of the title of Iron Shield Knight by the new clan leader, becoming a subordinate guard without territory. Diyu admires the loyalty and commanding ability of Captain Story, a knight. If it weren't for Story organizing the panicked knights to resist tenaciously, perhaps these knights would have been defeated long ago. Diyu forcibly left him in the castle on the grounds of no ransom. Due to the fact that the Marquis of Kyoto met the Falcon family invited by Lord Kyoto to help fight bandits while invading his territory, and died in a heroic duel, according to the tradition of Kingdom Knights, this is a battle between 2 noble and immensely brave knights, a fair and sacred battle, and a story worth reciting. So the Kyoto family cannot hold the Falcon family accountable for the attack, unless the Kyoto family is willing to admit that their lord was thrown off the warhorse and died in a sudden attack, which will make the already disgraced Kyoto family a laughingstock for the nobility. After doing so much to earn 2,000 gold coins, it seems that in order to get rich, one still needs to find a way from their own territory. Diyu briefly reviewed the report submitted by Statuenko. Although the battle was fruitful, the expenses were also very high. Due to the bounty marked before the war, these 2 battles consumed nearly 600 gold coins of their own bounty, and these farmers who had participated in the battle kept running away after returning to their territory. With a lot of money, no one was willing to stay in the castle and work hard, trying their best to run to their own homes. In the end, the 200 peasant militia ran away, leaving only about 70 people. Under the leadership of the leader, the hunters also retreated back to the mountains to spend the winter. Although the hunter leader promised that as long as he received his recruitment order, the hunters would come back immediately. However, these situations that had never been considered before made Diu question his idea of governing the army with money. Is it necessary to have knights to truly form a standing army? After 3 days of hard thinking under his head, Diu promulgated a new policy called land reward system, that he implemented within his territory. All soldiers who have participated in 10 battles with the Lord will be automatically promoted to elite soldiers and transferred to the castle to serve as the Lord's guard. The Lord will allocate a reward from the most fertile land near his castle to him. All soldiers who have hunted enemy heads in battle and accumulated 3 or more will be automatically promoted to elite soldiers and serve as the 3 commanders of the army. All soldiers who kill enemy knights in battle will become soldiers and serve as soldiers in the army. 10 people long will have the right to receive 1% of the spoils of war after the war. Money is the driving force behind people's development, while land is the foundation for retaining talent. This is the conclusion that Diu came to after several days of contemplation. As his impression of the land reward system of the Qin dynasty and the 8 banners system of the Manchu people gradually became clear in his mind, Diu felt his doubts and difficulties suddenly clear up. It turned out that this difficult problem had already been solved by his ancestors, and he had nothing else, except that there was still a lot of barren land. In this world where productivity is not yet developed, most farmers gather in villages, while in other places, there are often large tracts of wasteland left behind, especially the bare rod commander, who does not even have a feudal knight under his command. It can be said that the poor are left with land. Diu deliberately set aside pieces of land by the river outside his castle as a base and production site for his castle's garrison. I am not wealthy and cannot always keep a large number of soldiers in the castle. It is better to set aside land for them to cultivate on their own, and only need to hand in a very small amount of food. I serve as a soldier during wartime and as a citizen during peacetime, and conduct military training every day after dinner. The system of farming in the morning and training in the afternoon allows soldiers to support themselves, maintain a well-trained army, and drive commercial trade around them. Unlike before, farmers are brought back to their territory by knights after fighting. The new policy issued by the Lord has shaken the farmers on the farms within the territory. Receiving land rewards from the Lord has always been a privilege of the knightly lord, but now as long as you join the Lord's army, you have the opportunity to receive the Lord's land rewards and share the spoils of battle. Farming in the garrison camp outside the castle only requires a very small amount of food to be surrendered, which makes many extremely poor farmers feel like they have seen heaven. Being able to eat enough is their lifelong dream. With the free promotion of the escaped peasant soldiers, the farmers in the territory know that their lord is the most generous person in this kingdom, and now this good reputation is even more prominent. Everyone knows that their lord is a generous and trustworthy person. However, after just over a dozen days of posting the list, 1378 farmers gathered outside the castle requesting to join the army. This startled Diu, who was not mentally prepared yet. Even during the heyday of the Falcon family, 1,300 soldiers only managed to make up for an 800-strong army, including over 100 knights. Other leaders need to send knights to various villages to forcibly recruit soldiers, while their own arbitrary recruitment order attracted over 1,000 people. No wonder all powerful countries in history have closely linked land and military achievements, which is indeed the best way to allocate war resources. Just like the enthusiastic insurance salespeople who travel to the countryside and mountains all over the country, linking their interests to their achievements, earning more through hard work, and getting rich are the reasons why they persist in enduring the blind eye of others. The achievements of soldiers are their military achievements, and the interests of soldiers are their land. End of this chapter.